Hello and welcome to a re-recording of our educational component and a guided practice from our very first Empathic Exchange, grant funded by the Compassionate Center of Communication here in Ohio, and open to any and all members of our Diabetes Sangha and patrons to my passion project, Dear Diagnosis, which you can visit at www.deardiagnosis.com. The project is open and serving folks that are impacted by chronic illness and condition. But today, largely, I will focus on the application of principles to life with type 1 diabetes, something I have had for 25 years. I am a clinician, a licensed clinical social worker. I've been in practice for over 10 years now, and I think very much of my style, my skill sets, to be more in line with a coach than would be maybe a clinician. I come to this work from a very humble place of my own lived experiences, my own mental health challenges, and having been intuitively drawn to lots of different tools over the years that about 5 years ago now kind of culminated and came together in this really beautiful way for me as I began to study what Dr. Marshall Rosenberg calls nonviolent communication. I will refer to quite frequently as either NVC or compassionate communication. And today's presentation is largely going to orient us to that practice. In fact, let's go ahead and take a look at our itinerary. Items crossed out were included in the live programming and are still listed here so that if you do wish to join us for future programs, you have an idea of how I will generally create flow. Opening with introductions, icebreaker questions, an opportunity to connect with individuals on screen. We had a total of 13 in attendance last week. After which I'm likely to lead you in a centering with reflection on intent, if not just a mindfulness practice for the purpose of grounding, developing consciousness, an integral part of compassionate communication. There will always be some element of education, some element of guided practice, and eventually I would love to think that we'll be able to break off into small groups so that the practice can really be held and facilitated amongst peers. Today we'll skip over the opportunity to ask questions and give answers, reflect on the practice itself, and we'll move directly into a closing. So let's get started. If you are open to it, at the sound of the bowl, I invite you to close the eyes. And just take a moment here to cue the body, the nervous system, to the fact that you are in a, hopefully, safe space, and that it is okay to go inward, to tune out the sounds of our external environment so that we can tune inwardly to the mind stuff, the body stuff, and all that arises in between. So let's do that first by simply noticing the breath in the place where you feel it most vibrantly. Maybe that's the tip of the nose, or the center of the throat, or the center of the chest. Wherever breath seems to be moving, most noticeably in this moment, guide your attention there now. And watch it as if you were standing on the shore of an ocean. Watch that breath like a wave, ebbing and flowing, rising and falling, rolling in to this moment and receding. And as you attempt to bring awareness wholly and completely to breath breathing you, you're likely to find that the mind still talks, still thinks, that the body still itches and tickles and calls for attention. And that's fine. The goal in meditation is never truly to empty the contents of your mind and body, but instead to reposition yourself in relationship to them. And we can do that with an anchor, something that we're trying to keep primary attention on, like the breath in this moment. So with primary awareness of breath, I want you now to simply observe, to listen, and to watch internally what happens when I ask the question, why are you here? Why have you come? Why are you choosing now to watch this in your own free time? What is it most that you want to get out of this experience? See if you can watch, you can listen with curiosity, without any additional judgment, which is to say, the mind is likely to present information to you in ways that might feel evaluatory. And that's fine. There is no good or bad, right or wrong. There simply is. So for a moment longer, simply notice what is arising in response to the prompt. What do you want to get out of this experience? What, at the heart of that question, needs do you hope to have met in the time that you're here? If you want more time to sit with this query, feel free to pause the recording. Otherwise, a bell to bring us back. As the sound fades, let the chin drop to the chest so that the eyes can open away from a screen. Where we'll meet here to dive a little deeper into the heart of this practice. The heart of this practice being needs. I'll have much more to say on this in a moment, but what I want you to take now is just this reality that we are just another member of the animal kingdom. We are built primitively, and to ensure our survival, we are built to get our needs met. In fact, all actions can be looked at through the lens of needs. All feelings can be looked at as alerts, messengers, feedback surrounding needs. But before I go further, let me give credit where credit is due. This is not my work. The heart of this work is the work of Dr. Marshall Rosenberg, who landed on this terminology, nonviolent communication, because of the time and era in which he was coming into his own. He worked alongside, in many capacities, Martin Luther King, Mahatma Gandhi. He was very interested in nonviolence, in peace building. And from that work in the 1960s into the 1970s, this term was born, nonviolent communication. I will admit that the first time I heard this term, it came from my own counselor who was recommending that I look into the subject. And I bristled, thinking, I'm not violent. I want to point out that much of what we do in automacy as humans is aggressive, does impart violence, does not promote peace, compassion. So perhaps we'll use again the term NVC, or compassionate communication. But if you are interested in diving deeper, please note the book, the author. Feel free to look him up on YouTube. There is a companion workbook, and more on ways in which you can meet your needs through different learning styles coming at the end of this presentation. I would be remiss if I moved on, however, without acknowledging a few other names. I want to give credit to Oren J. Sofer and Roxy Manning, two trained NVC facilitators who have also been very pivotal in my own education and integration of this information. Doctors Stephen Porges and Brene Brown, a neuroscientist and a social scientist, respectively, have also been huge influences in this work and in my angling. And lastly, Resma Menicum and Deb Dana, two clinicians who have taught me how, at large, to apply these principles in my individual therapy work, and in turn inform how I present it here in the form of public education. So here are a few key principles and practices inherent to nonviolent communication. First and foremost, the idea that for each of us, humans, Homo sapiens, exists what we might call universal needs. I like to talk a lot of times about the idea of the job of our brain, the job of our nervous system. And so I want to reflect with you for a moment about why we think what we think. What is the purpose to this mind stuff? And why we feel what we feel. What's the purpose of this nervous system, of the energy in motion, emotion? So at the heart of this work is the recognition that we are built as animals in service to survival. But we are not primitive animals meant only to survive. We are also set up to thrive, which is why we have this thing called a brain that talks in service of our needs. It's constantly thinking about what came before our past, so that it can constantly be in prediction, anticipation of what may come in the future. It is constantly scanning our moment to moment, looking for threats, looking for those ways in which present moment data might inform us given past experiences and future desires. Our brain thinks what it thinks so that we can stay attuned to our ever-evolving needs. There's a lot of thoughts in there, though. Most believe that on average, an adult human brain has the capacity for upwards of 10,000 thoughts a day. And about 80% of those thoughts are believed to be instant replays. They're repetitive. You've heard them before. What makes a thought come back? Well, there's a way in which our body is built, mechanism to alert us to the thoughts that really need to be heard because if there are 10,000 thoughts in there, chances are good many of them are missed. The autonomic nervous system, in fact, the brainstem, here where our vagus nerve begins and then reaches into the body, touching almost every single organ, is meant to alert us to the threat of a need not being met. It's also meant to reinforce us, reward us for needs met. So when I feel excitement or I feel pleasure, I can assume that I have met a need. I can become more conscious of my thought content, of the situation at hand, of my actions in play. I could likely determine which need was met. Just as when I feel anxious, angry, sad, remorseful, I'm being alerted in many ways, shapes and forms, to needs that are literally not being met, or to the idea, the threat that a need may not be met if I proceed. So we might also use this analogy of the car and the car dashboard. You think about your body as the vehicle in which you use to navigate this lifetime. And you think about your emotions as the bells and whistles built into the car dashboard. When I sit down in the seat, ding, 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 I'm alerted to the need to get my seatbelt and put it on. I'm alerted to the gas, the fuel level. I'm alerted to the need for air in the tire, door closed. Ding, 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 my nervous system does something similar, alerting me to the need for sleep, food, shelter. Ding, ding, a more complicated need for acceptance or enjoyment, entertainment. All human actions are strategies, attempts to meet needs. Something important to hold on to as we continue to navigate this together. Last points here, I just want to make sure I emphasize. One, that we are pack animals. So human beings have an innate capacity for compassion, and we are built to thrive through connection. We'll come back to this. Also, to highlight is this capacity hinges on our ability to understand how needs influence feelings and behaviors, which really does require present moment awareness, attention training, consciousness, patience, and intentionality. And lastly, I want to emphasize the difference between these words that I know, especially in our Sangha, we sometimes use interchangeably. The word empathy, which literally has to do with a way of being with an experience, showing up to an experience so as to understand it. Whilst compassion is a practice of doing something about it, doing something with the pain and the suffering that's present. So for this to work though, there has to exist a willingness to investigate and to transform our automatic responses in both mind and body. I heard it said once before by a spiritual leader that to give compassion requires a willingness to sit in your own darkness, to sit with your own pain. Before we can sit with the pain of another and the darkness of someone else's experience, we have to know what it's like to sit with our own, to tolerate it, to move through it, to make sense of it. So let me provide a little more information by way of giving voice to two animals that are oftentimes used to embody what we will call that jackal mode or evaluatory habitual response to challenge, to life, versus the ideal, the giraffe, this more evolved form of consciousness, needs-based awareness that lends itself to connection, compassion, evolution, the flow state, if you will, in our nervous system, our ability to handle problems with insight and tenderness. So real quick, what does the jackal sound like? What is it that is so habitual in each of us? Well, there is a tendency to evaluate, to judge. It sounds like, here's what happened. You're two. She's right. He's bad. Again, this isn't wrong. This isn't something we want to necessarily get rid of. This is natural. This is how the mind was built to work, comparing, contrasting, weighing out the odds. This is what's kept us alive in many ways, shapes, and forms, but it is highly problematic. And without the giraffe, the ability to observe and express that which we might first hear as judgment, I see, I hear, I remember. This evolution in our way of being and our way of connecting is very difficult to get to. What else are we moving away from? This automatic reality whereby we oftentimes deny choice. We perceive scarcity. Again, this is evolutionary. It's important that we are aware that resources are not omnipresent, that choices are not always open and available, but it results in a real narrow way of thinking, an automated way of operating. I have to, I should, I must, I can't. There's only one way. It's you or me. We can't meet everyone's needs. Perhaps you can hear the violence in this approach. What are we trying to cultivate instead? This giraffe, this ability to extend the neck, see it from a different perspective, acknowledging choice, perceiving abundance. What's it sound like? I choose to. I want to. I'm learning to. There are many ways to meet needs. It's you and me. Perhaps there's a way that everyone's needs can get met. Jackal, automatic, habitual response to life, blames others, blames self. I feel because you, insert the judgment. I feel because I, insert the judgment. Again, there's some helpfulness, utility to this, but at large, it's problematic. How do we, like the giraffe, which is known to have the biggest heart of all land mammals, take responsibility instead for our own feelings, our own needs? A willingness to recognize, I feel because I need, or I feel because I needed. Jackal, low to the ground. One yelps, others join in. Listens selectively. It suggests, it lectures, it advises, it argues, it fixes, it analyzes. We're going to talk a lot about empathy blockers next month, but it communicates in a way that creates conflict. Whereas the giraffe is able to listen empathically. It too is able to hear feelings, guess at needs. Lastly, habitual response, jackal, seeking to protect through demands, rejection. If you've ever seen jackals fight over a carcass, there's no working together here, divvying up the food. There's a have to, nipping, a don't, a threatening, just do, and take what you want, a giving up even in moments. Surrendering, even if it means to the loss of something you needed, you cared about. That's jackal mode. How do we evolve? What are we cultivating here through nonviolent communication? We're seeking to enrich life through an invitation and request. Here's what I'd like, if you're willing. So again, let's look at this model a couple of different ways. And I am very much a visual learner. So here are some infographics or visual depictions of the educational material itself that I appreciate. At the heart of the practice is an understanding of needs, and will require that we develop in our language needs-based language. More on that to come. Alerting us to our needs are our feelings, almost again like the bells and whistles on the car dashboard. And they're coming largely from what we're thinking. It comes in, generally speaking, as evaluation. But in order to get to needs and in order to make sense of feelings, we need to turn that evaluation into an observation. And then from this awareness, I have an option to investigate what we'll call strategies in order to make requests, not demands, requests of myself, of others, of another. All of this involves kind of a flow between connecting with myself, expressing myself, empathically listening, connecting back to myself, expressing myself, empathically listening. And it does not work without these two frames. Attention in the present moment. Your brain will zoom to the past. It will wander to the future. We own that. We bring it back. And the intention to connect. If you are here to solve your chronic illness, if you are here to get rid of something in your life, to change something in your life by way of force, this practice is unlikely to work for you. The intention has to be first and foremost to connect. And the beauty is that through connection, we oftentimes can change. As we practice, and much of the information you might read will give this to you in a 4-step process. Observations, feelings, needs, requests. Keep in mind that the process is fluid and that you do not have to start with observations. That in fact, if the feeling is what's most alive in you, we'll start there. Another way of looking at this, how it plays itself out. So there is a stimulus, any stimulus. The stimulus could be someone screaming at me. The stimulus could be my inner critic screaming at myself. I have a choice. I can enter into that habitual thought and action. And I may very well end up stuck here. Or I can at some point begin to translate those judgments into observations. I can tune into my underlying feelings. I can assess until I find what is at the root of these feelings, what needs are in threat. And then I can seek to make either what's called a connection request, a request whereby I am simply trying to connect with myself or connect with another. An example might be in conversation with myself, am I willing to just feel this for a moment? In connection with another, are you willing to tell me what's coming up for you as I share this? Or are you willing to tell me what you've heard me share? Versus an action request, which we're all much more familiar with. An action for myself might be, am I willing to call a friend right now so that I can talk this out with somebody I know I trust? A connection to another might be, are you willing to sit down and have a conversation with me? Are you willing to take your shoes off before entering my home? All of this is grounded in empathy, awareness constantly, not only of what's happening inside of yourself, but happening inside of another. A final way of looking at this We've got a stimulus down here that, again, oftentimes will result in an automatic, habitual thought cycle, reaction cycle, largely built on blame, shame, judgment. In this, we have a choice to dive deeply into our jackal show, to go inwardly and allow, perhaps even outwardly, those judgmental voices to be heard. And in fact, I feel that that is oftentimes a necessary process. I love that this yields for us a reality check whereby we can stay here in that cycle, or we can move on to really connecting with what's alive in us, our feelings, what you value most, values being oftentimes synonymous with needs. And from that place emerges a new choice, a choice to sit here in self-empathy, a way of being tenderly, non-judgmentally, with whatever's happening inside, or seeking to express empathically how we are feeling to another, which then very well becomes about outer communication. And will either flow in the direction of speaking about my own observations, feelings, needs, requests, or moving into what another may be feeling or needing. So I've given you a lot. And I think most of us learn most intimately through practicum. So allow me now to lead you through a self-empathy practice. If you do not already have a piece of paper in front of you, I would encourage you to get one now. And I will also encourage that you have a printed out list of feelings and needs. If you struggle to identify feelings in the vocabulary most commonly used, you can also print out the list I've offered for body sensations. In fact, again, that word emotion in Latin comes from the root e-motion, energy in motion. It is energy alerting us to needs. So more importantly than being able to say, I feel jealous or I feel bereaved, is I feel a heaviness in my chest. I feel a buzzing energy in my head. Take a moment, visit our website. I'm sure we will have this somewhere under the resource tab at Diabetes Sangha. I will also make it a point to put these attachments on my Dear Diagnosis site under the Meetup tab, and I have already shared them to our social media feeds. Let's go ahead and get started. So the very first thing to do here is to identify a stimulus. And because I anticipate most of us are here with a chronic illness, perhaps we can identify a situation that generally causes us to feel upset or unsettled with self as it applies to living the life impacted by chronic condition. Once you identify that stimulus, you're going to try to make an observation out of it. So keep in mind, when you're working with an observation, we're working with scientific language. You know, the idea that we could have captured it on camera, that we could have measured it in some capacity as happening. Details are helpful. Here's my example. And I've given you something first that would be more of a judgment. First thing that came to mind for me was when I'm alerted to a bad number skyrocketing on my CGM. For those without diabetes, that's continuous glucose monitor. That in and of itself is already triggering some emotional response inside of me because it's a loaded judgment of what's happening, right? My number is skyrocketing. So I try to put that in scientific language. When my CGM alerts to inform me that my blood sugar is over 200 and the arrow is pointing upward after I've consumed something that required guesswork. So for those, again, without diabetes, what I am inferring here is that I've eaten something where I did not have a package with a clear carbohydrate count to reference. Take a moment, pause the video if you'd like, to identify your stimulus. Continuing onward, we'll next identify the judgmental thinking that goes on inside of you when stimulated in this way. So the first thing we're doing is giving voice to what Marshall calls the jackal show, jackal thinking. These are the judgments, the enemy images, the evaluatory, habitual, automatic response to the emotion that is most likely aroused and to the stimulus that has been presented. So for me, in this scenario I've given, sounds like this. What the, insert my expletives. What'd I mess up this time? I'm gonna make judgments, questions, struggling with the idea of my carb count, the timing of my insulin. I'm looking for a place to put blame. Is it me? Is it the equipment? Is it the damn baker of the pastry I ate? I should have used an app to guesstimate. I should have made a better choice. Shame. I've been living with type 1 diabetes for 25 years. Why can't I get this right? I have to pay better attention. I've got to keep better control. I shouldn't give in to temptation so easily. I'm going to have to tighten the reins this week. My body's keeping score. I'm responsible for whatever complications come my way. The emotions are palpable, and they're intimately tied to this jackal thinking. Take a moment, pause the video if you need to, capture the jackal alive in you. From here, we're going to bring awareness, attention, empathy, a way of being with what arises from this inner dialogue. What energy in motion becomes at play? So I want you to take note of emergent physical sensations. And if you've got them, emotional vocabulary. I've given you here on the screen an idea of what that might look and sound like. Again, lists are available to you at our websites and on social media. Here's what it looks like in practice. As I sit with myself and this jackal thinking about my food choices and that damn number skyrocketing on my CGM, jackal thinking, I become aware that there is a pit in my stomach. And there is a lot of energy buzzing about in my head. There's also a constriction for me occurring inside of my chest, particularly my lower ribs, impacting my diaphragm, making it hard to breathe. If I were to guess at what the emotional vocabulary here is, I would say I am vacillating between anger and anxiety, sadness and confusion. Pause the video if you need to sit with your own felt experience for a moment. When you're ready, we'll move on to needs. So given your thoughts and your feelings, I want you to consider your needs, the needs that might be compromised in this situation or in a situation like this. In other words, what matters most to you that you are not able to access when stimulated in this way? What you see here at first glance is a list of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Certainly, it can inform you in this inquiry, but I've yet to see a fully comprehensive list of needs. In fact, I think ultimately we have a lot of different ways in which we use language to speak about similar constructs. So the word ease, a need for ease, might mean something very differently for me than it would for you, which is why, again, these lists can be exhaustive. Here I've given you a little bit more of a concise list specifically printed in Dr. Rosenberg's book. But for longer lists, I want you to pause the video, print out those forms at our website or social media sites. I'll go ahead and demonstrate what this looks like in my role play. So here I am, sitting inwardly with the feelings arising: confusion, sadness, fear, anxiety, anger. The thoughts whirling about have much to do with blame, shame, judgment of my actions, my choices, my abilities, my competency. In fact, the very first need to become clear in this inquiry for me is the need for competency, the need for effectiveness in my own diabetes management. There's more to that there, I think. But to start, it feels very clear to me that that's what I'm wanting, is to feel effective, to meet my needs for competency by way of making an educated guess that was correct, or making a choice that allowed the blood sugar to remain more stable. Perhaps if I look to my list, my printout, I might also find here needs that jump off the page, that when I read them, I feel internally like a sigh of relief, almost like that sigh that comes along when I share something vulnerable with a friend and they get it. They accept me. Other needs jumping off the page for me include the need for ease and enjoyment when it comes to going out to eat and choosing things on a menu. Understanding and acceptance. And understanding that I'm doing the best that I can. And an acceptance that diabetes management is not as easy as we may have been led to believe. I'm also aware of the need for freedom. This need to be rid of the confines, the have-tos, the carb counting, the heavy lifting that comes with each and every decision I make. I feel that need open up inside of me, almost like it can take the place of the negative constriction I was feeling a moment ago. Pause the video if you need some more time with this practice. From here, I chose to lead participants in a self-empathy dance. thanks to one particular member of our Sangha who was willing to offer up her example, I sought to walk her through the stages of judging and blaming the jackal show, of being clear about what was happening, the observation of the stimulus. More specifically, that in this practice, the stimulus is not necessarily the external, the number on my CGM, the alert, the alarm I'm hearing, but even more so that the stimulus is internal. In response to this, I started shaming, blaming, judging. In our example, she did too. Helping to move her then to an awareness of feelings and to an exploration of needs. Before I was humbly reminded of the need to stop and to mourn, grieve, that which effectively we cannot have met. So it might look and sound like this. And I get clear that freedom from this condition is what I long for most. I can move away from the jackal thinking, the judgment, the shame, the blame, the confusion. And I can instead observe with clarity precisely what is happening. I have a chronic condition. I've been living with it for 25 years. There is no cure. It requires that I pay a lot of attention, much more than most, to everything I eat, all activity. Diabetes management is exhausting. And when literal bells and whistles go off on my durable medical equipment to alert me to the fact that the number is out of range, observing. When that happens, I have an automatic habitual response. In my mind, I begin to evaluate harshly, catastrophize, blame and shame myself. And when I do that, my feelings become much more complicated. My needs become much more layered. And if I sit here and I identify those needs again, those needs for competency, which for me is up in my head and somehow out here in front of me, maybe literally on the screen of my pump, my phone. And I evaluate that need for effectiveness. I feel it in my shoulders, like a desire to release here, like the sigh of relief. Yes, I guessed right. Yes, the number is still where I want it. But as I start to think about those needs and I start to consider whether I might move on to strategizing, how could I get those needs met? I realized very quickly that any strategy offered here doesn't feel good. In fact, it only creates more jackal thinking because there is no perfect way of managing this chronic illness. And there is no easy way to enjoy food and maintain balance in glucose. So I get lost again in the chaos when I move to strategies, which is the effective stop to know I need to grieve. I need to grieve that competency and effectiveness aren't exactly guarantees. And behind them exists something much more alive in me in this moment, the desire to be free, to feel ease in how I interact with food and make choices at a restaurant. And if I ask myself where freedom lives inside of me, I feel it in my center. I feel it in my heart space. And if I call on common humanity to remind myself that this is a universal human need, that everyone longs for freedom, I feel a warmth there, an opening there. There's a sadness to this too, right? Because so many of us long for freedom and will never find it. There's a beauty to this grief, a beauty to this shared, unmet need. If you want to learn more about nonviolent communication, you will effectively learn more about strategies and requests. But for the purposes of today and our empathic exchange practice at large, we are simply going to practice exploring and giving voice to our feelings and our needs. And we can't do that without first recognizing our habitual responses in our thought processes, in our autonomic nervous system response to life's stressors. A moment of closing. If you'd like, you might choose to close your eyes as I read aloud a poem written by Rumi, and one that has always been near and dear to my heart. The Guest House. This being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. Even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture, still treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide, a messenger from beyond. We will continue, thanks to our grant sponsorship, to meet monthly through June of 2023 on the third Wednesday of every month at 8:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, using the link that we use to meet regularly as a Sangha for meditation. It is free of charge for you to attend. And again, anyone is welcome here whose life is intimately impacted by chronic illness or condition. If you would like to take a deeper dive into the topic, The grant funder, Compassionate Communication of Central Ohio, this is a mouthful, it does not roll off the tongue, CCCO, offers on the first Thursday of every month from 7:30 to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time a free introductory workshop. They also offer 3 times a week an empathy hour at lunchtime, where you can literally come and you will be broken into pairs of 2. If it is your first time, you have absolutely no experience with NVC, you are likely to have a facilitator in the room with you for a practice of sharing and reflecting feelings and needs. Other free offerings can be found on their website, and I will continue to drop nuggets, resources into our social media feeds and on our website. It is my honor and privilege to share this with you. Until next time, my friends, be well.